Imagine a world without electricity, buildings, tap water, advanced medicine, cars, airplanes, or even 12 years of formal education. A world far from the one we currently live in. That's what the world could have been if the Industrial Revolution never happened. The Industrial Revolution was a period of transformation from the 18th to the 19th century. Europe, specifically Britain, went through extreme changes in agriculture, mining, manufacturing, transportation, and technology that affected the socio-economic and cultural conditions. But before delving into the history of this revolution, let's go back in time to the cottage industry. During the early 18th century, the cottage industry, also known as the domestic system, was a small-scale manufacturing business that was based in homes or small rural shops, where workers used hand tools or simple machines. It bought the putting out system, which is the production system where a merchant capitalists give the raw material to a rural worker who then turns the material into a finished product for money. Back then, it was managed and owned by the head of the household. The cottage industry was effective in a way, but since families would work at their own pace, productivity was slow, making the cost higher. The longer it took for a worker to finish a product, the higher the price gets. Therefore, these goods were high in price and were bought usually by wealthy people, making the cottage system more labor intensive. The cottage system workers were usually the family members. Since the work did not require any learned skill, it was suitable for women and even children to do the work. This system gave the father of the household a manager status, which allowed him to control his own time and direct the business himself. The domestic work unit practiced the division of labor. Each member could specialize on just one stage in a sequence of production. The cottage workers owned their own traditional hand tools, such as the spinner's wheel, the weaver's loom, the cordwainer's bench, the nail maker's forge, and the seamstress humble. All these tools were effective yet were still very time-consuming and slow. Working at home with these hand tools gave the wage earner the benefit of working at their own pace and not having to worry or keep up with the steam engines. The cottage industry also had its own strengths. Workers could work at their own speed, they could work at home or near their own home, and could rest whenever they needed to. They could also have meals whenever they wanted. Tensions at work was minimal since the family worked as a unit. Children are treated far better than they are treated in factory systems. Mothers work at home so they can still look after their children. But there was also some weaknesses to the cottage industry, as the production was slow and wasn't able to meet the demand. And there was also a loss of time, because materials were taken from cottage to cottage and production was done in several stages. But as the population expanded, the demand for goods rose, and the cottage industry was no longer able to sustain itself, so it paved the way for the Industrial Revolution. Now, why did the Industrial Revolution begin in Britain? Well, the British seemed to have two huge advantages that were able to mark it as the birthplace of the revolution. First of all, Britain was abundant in the presence of essential natural resources, as well as a proper transport system, allowed Britain to advance in terms of industrial efficiency, better communication, and manufacturing. Britain had huge reserves of iron and coal, both of which were imperative to the Industrial Revolution's energy. Whilst iron was used in tools and machines, coal was used to fuel factories and furnaces. Another aspect was the fact that Britain had a strong financial system that actually encouraged entrepreneurs to experiment in funding various industrial projects. To add on, geographically, Britain was isolated and was able to maintain its government compared to the rest of the European nations that were still struggling in establishing their states. Not only that, but they used their rivers and their harbors in order to transport natural resources and finished goods. Let's not forget that Britain was also a colonial empire, which gave it access to raw material. And with the inventions of railroads, Britain had a cheap way to transport raw material and finished goods. It also created thousands of jobs, like laying track and mining coal. So, in conclusion, Britain's economic, political, and geographical advantages made it perfect for it to be a candidate to the launch of the Industrial Revolution. It was able to thrive due to the new innovations that made producing goods much faster and more efficiently than before. The inventions were intimately interconnected. The invention of the flying shuttle by John Kay in 1733 increased the speed at which a weave was produced. It allowed a single weaver to weave much wider fabrics. Soon after that, James Hargreaves in 1760 invented the spinning jenny. It expanded the level that allowed a single spinner to produce 16 times as much thread as before. The spinning jenny was much more efficient than the spinning wheels. Richard Arkwright in 1760 invented the water frame, which is the larger version of the spinning wheel but replaced the hand power with water power. This machine made thousands of cotton threads all at once. After that, Samuel Crompton in 1779 invented the spinning mule, and it was powered by steam. Edmund Corntwig in 1784 invented the power loom, steam-powered invention, and it is a mechanically operated version of a regular loom. It combines thread to make cloth. Eli Whitney in 1793 invented the cotton gin, which sped up the process of removing seeds from cotton plants with less work. All these innovations helped the Industrial Revolution by accelerating the process of producing to meet the growing demand. Even though the Industrial Revolution did have a good impact on infrastructure and modern inventions, it had a bad impact on the workers. Children actually did labor, and in coal mines, children had to crawl through narrow underground passages as low as 16 to 18 inches in height, as well as the factories that would emit a great deal of CO2 into the atmosphere. The smog filled the atmosphere and the people's lungs. It killed workers on a daily basis. Since these people were poor, they lived a very hard life, living in slums, in overcrowded buildings, and worked for long hours getting paid the bare minimum. Friedrich Engels was a German philosopher who advocated for the bettering of the working class. In fact, in 1833, the Factory Act was passed. It improved the working conditions for children and women, making them work for less amount of hours, and children under 9 were not allowed to work. The Public Health Act of 1848 was done after several cholera outbreaks. It aimed to improve the sewage disposal and purify the water supply. It is inevitable that the Industrial Revolution marks a major turning point in human history, thus shaping the way we live today. With the inventions of new technologies, improvement in infrastructure, and advancement in proper healthcare and education systems, the Industrial Revolution has paved the way for progressive thinking.